part that we don't always talk about or is not really mentioned is the experience that is returning to your home country and experiencing reverse culture shock. Hey there, my name is Ashely Liliana and I share all things travel and navigating life abroad. If you've been following me from the beginning, you know that I was living in Chile and now I'm currently in New York City as I prepare for my next adventure. We talk about navigating life abroad, which is what I like to do on this channel, but we don't always talk about navigating reverse culture shock and the return home, which is just as an important part of the whole moving abroad and living abroad process. So that's what this video is going to be about. I'm going to be sharing with you what is reverse culture shock and ways to manage reverse culture shock. If you're unfamiliar with the term, you're probably very familiar with the feelings and the experience that is returning home after a period of time abroad. So the fancy definition of reverse culture shock is the term used to describe the feelings of surprise, disorientation, confusion, sadness, and frustration experienced when people return to their home country and find they do not fit in as they used to. Now I know that when I first came to learn about this term and found this, I was so happy because I had already experienced reverse culture shock one time prior and I felt this way, but I had no idea why I was feeling this or what these feelings were. I just came from this amazing experience and I was feeling all of these emotions of sadness, confusion, but at the time I didn't know I was experiencing this and I didn't know how to manage or deal with it. I didn't prepare myself really mentally or emotionally to what I was going to experience when I returned home. And sure enough, when I returned, all of a sudden had these feelings of just complete sadness and frustration and even anger. And since then, I've actually experienced it 2 more times. I will say that with time, it gets a bit easier to deal with. You find what works for you and how to manage, so it's definitely not as strong and as hard as it was the first time, but it's still pretty challenging to manage and navigate sometimes. So before we get into dealing with it and managing it, I do want to say that reverse culture shock can look very different for everyone, because depending on the country that you're returning to and the country that you were living in for a period of time, that impacts and influences how you're going to experience reverse culture shock, also the city or the town that you're returning to. So just to give you an idea, here's some of mine. The first thing was because of the pandemic. When I returned here in New York, people really didn't have to wear masks. They can go into restaurants or cafes without wearing their mask, and also just the promotion of getting people to get vaccinated with all of these different incentives. For me, that was really frustrating because I came from a country where I was in lockdown for about almost 4 out of the 5 months that I was living there. And so I was very limited on the things that I could do. And so to see people walking around like there was no pandemic, where the pandemic was still very real in other parts of the world, was really hard for me, and it just produced these emotions of really frustration. Another thing was the difference in pace of life. When I was in Bali, it was super slow. You know, you were kind of in this bubble. You didn't need much to be fulfilled and to be happy. And then you come here to the United States and it's a lot faster than other parts of the world. Even living in Santiago to New York City, even though Santiago is still a city, the pace of life is a lot slower there than in New York City. But there's also the sadness that came with it, a feeling of grieving that I had to kind of go through, of letting go kind of that part of my life, that lifestyle, my routine from that life, and then trying to adjust to a place that's a bit faster. Those are just some examples for me of what trigger my reverse culture shock and these feelings. Again, for you, it might be different. Make plans before you return home, whether that's making plans with friends or family. Have something in your calendar, something that you've scheduled that is set in stone to help you look forward to something in the process of returning home. So if you're returning home, it's probably because you've been either traveling for a long period of time or living abroad. You probably have an adventurous soul and someone who loves to travel. So planning trips is a really great way to keep that adventurous soul alive and on its toes. Whether that's planning a trip to see friends in another state or another city, a solo trip or a trip with friends, that whole experience of packing, going somewhere that is new, experiencing culture, whatever it is, whether it's for a short period of time or for, again, a long period of time, it helps keep that momentum going. Catch up on all your movies and TV shows that you missed. Yeah, seems kind of silly, but probably didn't have access to movies that you really wanted to see, or maybe a TV show that you really loved and you had to part ways with for a period of time. Take a day for yourself to binge on all the shows or the movies that you've missed. I know that I personally came home and I watched Pose. I also like Law & Order, SVU, and so I took time to catch up on the latest season and just made a day for myself doing so. Connect with friends. Now, the first time that I experienced it, the first 2 times I should say, that I experienced reverse culture shock, I did meet up with friends, and after that initial meeting up with friends and spending time with them, eventually you start to see your friends again, hang out with them more regularly, and the thing that I noticed was that our experiences were very different. I didn't want to be that friend who always started, the sentence with, when I was in Chile, but that was something that was very much a part of my life, that I had lived through that experience that was my life for a period of time. I felt weird or something about being that friend. I started to feel a sense of loneliness or isolating feeling sometimes when I was with certain friends, because as much as I love my friends, we were living 2 different kinds of lives and having very different life experiences that neither one of us were there to witness. Connect with friends who are on similar paths. Still see your friends, but also connect with friends who have shared similar experiences as you, because there is power in shared experiences. So whether that friend has lived abroad at some point in their life or is living abroad, take time to talk with them and connect with them again. Even if you can't go physically see them through FaceTime or virtually or Zoom or whatever it is, make sure you do it, because I found that when I would talk to friends about reverse culture shock and the emotions and the feelings that I was going through, they were able to really understand that feeling and provide, tips and just words of wisdom when it came to that experience. But definitely connect with friends, not only who are on similar paths, but friends who have experienced reverse culture shock or have that similar shared experience with you. It definitely helps. Take time to reflect. You're probably like, I don't want to do this, but I highly recommend, and that for you can look very different. Maybe you like to walk or take hikes on your own, or maybe you like to meditate, whatever that looks like for you, but definitely incorporate that in your transition home. Personally, I like to journal, I like to write. It helps me kind of express all that I am feeling, take stock of my emotions and where I am mentally and emotionally. And so for me, I really take time to be intentional about journaling. Definitely take that time to reflect on your transition, on your return home, and what your life abroad was like. Next tip is to treat it as an adventure / make an experience list. So if you are familiar with the book Vagabonding, An Uncommon Guide to the Art of Long-Term World Travel by Ralph Potts, then you probably know what I'm talking about. But if not, I definitely recommend reading that book if you're someone who's interested in budget travel and budget long-term travel. That's a great resource. But for me, it was actually really the final chapter that hit me and that really spoke to me, because I was actually in the process of getting ready to return home. And the final chapter is all about return home. And the one line that Ralph Potts wrote was, treat it as an adventure. When we are preparing for our move abroad or for our long-term travel, it's this adventure. We want to see certain places, experience certain things, try certain things, and there's this adventure aspect to it. But when we return home, we kind of don't see it that way. It really kind of spoke to me that it was all about your mindset and how you view your return home. Whether it's your choice to return home, maybe it's not your choice, whatever the circumstance is, to try to make it as much as an adventure as possible really does help in the transition of returning home. And so why I say an experience list is, if you watch my video, How to Prepare for Your Move Abroad, where I talk about the checklist, I do mention to write an experience list in preparing for your move abroad. Well, I'm going to say the same exact thing for the return home. This experience list could be very different. It could be all the foods that you missed while you were away that you want to have again. Maybe there are new vegetarian restaurants that have opened up in your city or town that you want to go and eat at. There's a new art exhibit or something that has called your attention that you really want to go see, or whatever it is. I recommend creating an experience list the same way you do when you prepare for your move abroad. I recommend creating an experience list when you actually transition and return back home. And my final tip, which might feel a little bit contradicting to what I've mentioned before, is to give yourself grace or yourself patience, however you want to phrase it. Sometimes it's just going to be, I shouldn't even say sometimes, you're probably going to do everything that I've mentioned in your own way, and maybe even other things. And there are just going to be some days that it's going to feel very overwhelming, and it's just going to feel hard to transition home, to be home. I think a lot of it is because you have changed in many ways. Your lifestyle, your habits, your routine, your perspective has changed, and your home or your home country in many ways still might feel and look the same. And so trying to navigate those two spaces can be very hard. And so that's why I say to give yourself grace. Because some days you're just going to need to lay in bed and have yourself a really good cry because you just need it. And that's okay too. To not always treat it like an adventure, to just feel the emotions. This is not to take away all these feelings, because you're still going to feel frustration and sadness and confusion and disorientation and all of those things. These are just ways to help you navigate and manage all of those feelings in different ways. But some days you're just going to feel all of those things. And the only thing that you want to do is lay in bed and cry, and that's okay. I've done it. And I do want to say that if you are feeling that you can't manage it, and it is very overwhelming, to seek help. You're not in it alone. If you feel alone, there's always help out there. If you have experience navigating reverse culture shock and the return home, or you find yourself in the process of doing so, and there's a tip or a piece of advice that you feel that I missed and you really want to share, please share that down below in the comments. I'm sure that I will find it useful and someone else might find it useful. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you want to follow the journey, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one. Ciao!